When he became president, the Cold War was at its height, and there was no area in the world that was manifested than in Southern Africa. You had the countries of South Africa fighting apartheid. You had in then Rhodesia fighting against white minority rule. And then you had in Angola, the liberation movement there were also fighting. In fact, by the time he came to office, the MPLA, which was the main liberation movement there, had succeeded in gaining power through military means. And then you had Cuba sending some 36,000 troops or so to help support the Angolan government then under the MPLA of Agostinho Neto. And so when you had a combination of those factors taking place, you also had the Cold War, wherein you had the Soviet Union supporting one side of the conflict in Southern Africa, and then you had the United States and most of its NATO allies supporting the other side. So it was really not an easy phenomenon to look into. So Carter came in there, and he actually helped in influencing the negotiations that led to the fall of the white minority government in Rhodesia then, but today Zimbabwe.
The black citizens, who constitute 96% of the population of Zimbabwe, Rhodesia, never had a chance to consider nor to vote for or against the Constitution under which the elections were held.
Yeah, it seems like a lot of his involvement in Africa, he wanted to get involved really because he had said after his presidency that he had wished he had gotten more involved with the segregation issues and the racist issues going on here in the United States, in the South. And that's something that bothered him, certainly when he became governor of Georgia down here. So do you think that had a pretty big effect on him in how he wanted to approach Africa, because he couldn't stand racism and he didn't feel like he did as much as he should have or gotten involved earlier with the issue in his life here in the United States?
Yeah, that's correct, except that he, being the president of the United States, his involvement in Africa, he had that the tension between supporting what is right, at the same time trying to pursue and essentially furthering U.S. foreign policy. And the furtherance of U.S. foreign policy meant essentially, as was the case then, supporting, in as much as he would not have liked that, supporting governments such as the apartheid regime in South Africa under various pretexts that they were fighting against communism, and that if they did not really stay in power, then communists would take over through the various liberation movements. So you had that tension taking place within Carter. But then he did morally condemn the South African regime, and also strategically understood that if he had not really, if he did not really take some actions to bring about black majority rule in Zimbabwe, then the so-called communist forces and so forth that were embedding the various liberation movements would actually succeed in a place like Zimbabwe, and then you have Zimbabwe under more or less Marxist leadership, as well as Angola. So you had those tensions in place, but there's one other cautionary note, which is that when he came to power, he brought in a good number of influential black Americans who tried to persuade him that indeed the struggle in Southern Africa was indeed, those whom they termed to be Marxist were indeed liberation fighters. And as a result, there was that big difference between them and the communists. They were mainly fighting for their civil rights, the same way that a lot of the civil rights leaders in the U.S. were fighting. So he came to see that. And you would also maybe understand that in the United Nations, somebody like Andrew Young, who was his UN ambassador, indeed took a lot of unconventional type stances in terms of behavior and so on and so forth. But in the end, Carter supported him, and he continued to be an influential leader. So indeed, his upbringing in the U.S. did help him significantly how he saw the African issues.